It is so good to be here, and I want to take a moment to just recognize all the amazing gifts we have had this morning, and to thank Johanna for her music, and Caitlin for her words, and the MDUUCs for theirs, and just everyone, our two beautiful worship associates. So we are grateful to have Mark tuning back and Brett at the piano. We just have a lot to be grateful for. Let's just take a moment. So this morning, before I am done, it is my plan to convince you that telomeres matter, that despite what other religions might tell you, dancing is good for your soul, that prayer can in fact change your life, which may be the hardest among you, and that new possibilities are out there, even in overwhelming times. All this in less than 15 minutes. So the picture on the front of your program is of the God jar from my dining room, and I want to remind our streaming friends that our program is on the homepage if you want to look at it. So it was created when my daughter was young as one of our Friday family fun night occasions, which were little spaces that were carved out of the busy weeks of piano lessons and soccer and work and homework, with paint and imagination and a touching of the holy and sacred, combined with the most important element, which was time spent actually together. We created what is perhaps one of my favorite objects. It has, in fact, ranked a mention in sermons past, but today it gets to be the star, my metaphor, for the ways that we can cultivate joy even in the midst of challenging times. I have a personal tradition, which is to share in my first service back in August something unusual or creative or restorative, something that's outside the usual form or usual routine. And often it's a practice that I've experimented with, as Caitlin talked about, during the summer weeks of rest and relaxation, restoration. I realized at the end of July, when the newsletter deadline was upon us, that if my summer kept going the way it was going, I wasn't going to have a whole lot to say in this vein. If I am truthful, and if we are all truthful, the last couple summers have had a really different kind of rhythm, with hard occurrences and unusual tragedies marking them. And this summer it was the mass shootings. The past few have been the deaths at the hands of police with black men, the fires, the hurricanes, the mass immigration crisis caused by economic and environmental factors. This increasing heat that we're seeing in the world and in human relations are giving us less and less and less of those kinds of hedonistic, out-of-rhythm summers, and more summers of disruption and stress. Andrew Zolli, who directs the Global Innovation Network Pop Tech and a former fellow of the National Geographic Society, wrote in his book Resilience, Why Things Bounce Back, that as individuals, we are like many of the political, social, and economic institutions of our time in our world, which are, as he puts it, robust yet fragile. We're fine when things are predictable and vulnerable when they're not. So we truly need to think about what we do to restore ourselves, because we need to have practices in our life that restore our joy. Joy is important because it's the only one of the four general categories and families of feelings which is actually positive. So a person could be fearful, they can be angry, they can be sad, or joyful. It's really not a hard choice about which to cultivate for most of us. So there's a conversation between the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, which became a book called The Book of Joy. And in it, the Dalai Lama says, joy is different than happiness. Joy is different than happiness. Happiness is a sense of satisfaction. I think this is really liberating, because often I get up and I think, this world that we're living in is not very satisfying. But joy is different than that. Archbishop Tutu says, joy is much bigger than happiness. Happiness is dependent on external circumstances, but joy is not. This is good news, my friends. This is good news for a person who loves humanity, who loves the planet, who loves our world. But what are we to do? It came to me in that moment of July that we need to play and pray and relate and create. And I might have put them in a little different order in this sermon because that happens sometimes. But the good news may be that while the summer may no longer be the kind of time for total restoration for most of us, the lesson isn't that there isn't time for joy. The lesson is that we need to make space for joy all year round instead. And that's good news. So let's go back to the God jar. The idea of it came from Julia Cameron, who is the author of The Artist's Way. She says you decorate a vessel, and into that you put things that are too large for you to hold. You can put them in there metaphorically, or you can literally write down something on a piece of paper and you can stick them in the jar. A sorrow that you can't put down. A worry that just keeps waking you up night after night. The illness of people that you love. An addiction that is steering your life. By putting it in the jar, you are saying that you understand that it's something that is too large for you to fix or address, no matter how much you might want to. You might not even be able to really think it all through, but you turn it over to something that is larger than you. And some of us call that God, or some of us call it spirit, the natural world. You can just call it the not me. That works. The not me. Just turn it over to the not me. But the point of The Artist's Way is not to be the most technical or skilled painter, thank goodness, as you can see. The point is to have fun and to release that childlike exuberance within you. In other words, the point is to play. Play is something that many of us lack in our lives. In challenging times, the world can make us particularly think we shouldn't do it, especially those of us in the helping professions, and I know that many of you are in those professions. Also, those of us who care about the world and its survival can feel like it's just a little self-indulgent to take time for joy, but it's not. I do want to take a moment and say, speaking of the helping professions, can we take a moment and honor the teachers who are among us today? We bless the backpacks, but who we also need to bless is the teachers. Thank you. So for me, this really was a summer of doing what needed to be done. But one of my favorite moments will be a memory of a game of cards with 3 generations of my family in a hotel lobby and a game of charades in the living room of an inn. Both were silly and funny and lots of time of giving people grief about rule breaking, which seems to run in my family. Play, whether it is an instrument, how about those MDUUCs? Yes, definitely. Play, whether it's music or hobbies or crafts or real art or just silliness, is really important. And sometimes when I've had a really hard day, at the end of the day, when I get home from that last meeting, I go and I sit out on the concrete step in front of my house. And since I don't smoke, I blow bubbles. And sometimes I go in the house and I dance with dogs, which, while it may pose some bodily risk, is really, in my theology, liberating for your spirit. But I blow bubbles and I dance for the same reason that I go outside and I walk under the stars, because I'm seeking a connection to something larger, because I need to know that it's out there, the not me. And what I want to say is, I know that some of you don't feel comfortable about prayer, but I want you to again look at that word, prayer, etymologically. It just means a deep ask, an ask that acknowledges that I need something that is beyond my personal resources. And there are all of us have those days when we have that ask. So some days we really need to go out there at the end of the day, prayer, meditation, reflection, whatever you call it, it's that communing with the not me. In the face of hate rising and false news, melting ice caps and faltering economies, and just the normal cycles of loss, aging, trying to be people together, We need something that's beyond our own feeling of inadequacy, because if we dwell in that too long, we can feel a little desperate, we can feel really lonely, and we know loneliness is really on the rise in our society. If we just sit there, if we just light a candle, take a few extra breaths, clear our mind, or just write something on a piece of paper and give it up to that jar. It doesn't cool our warming planet, it doesn't heal all the hurts for those that I have or those that I love, but it does, in fact, allow me to restore my spirit so that I might have the energy to still do that small thing that I can do. Creating does that too. I am not particularly handy or crafty, though I know a lot of people who are. When I knit and I purl. I knit and I purl. However, I once knitted an entire Afghan that way, which kept my spirit from being crushed by the circumstances I was in at that time. When I sew, the best you can say is that 2 pieces of fabric have a new bond. It is definitely not the artistry that some of our fabric artists here have. However, when we had almost no money, I bought a book and I reupholstered our furniture and brought life and color into what was otherwise our very drab living space. When I cook lately, I'm liking kind of diner fare more than I am the fancy stuff. When I bead or I paint, I'm more about the color and the form. But I've done this with people I love, and so the things that we create are really precious to me. When I color, well, there are those damn lines. But anytime I make something, it soothes my heart. Whether it's making music, creating a beautiful living space, gardening, or building, when we engage in the creative enterprise, we touch possibility. Our mastery culture makes it all about being really good at everything, often about being the best, and that's why so many get discouraged in their elementary school art classes, or their first year of music lessons, or they lose that drive or that willingness. The kind of creating we all need is about tapping into that meditative, expansive part of us, or connecting, which is why I love that I have a chalkboard door in my kitchen, where people with more gifts than I have leave me drawings and words, which bring me joy throughout my week. My last favorite thing about the God jar, an object which was fun to create and intended to hold prayers, is that I did it with people that I love. Those Friday family fun nights made a time for us to honor that and to relate. Too often, we might not take that time with the people that we love because we're all in this nation working longer hours, because the times call more of us into more and more service, because we're feeling too sad about real losses, and yet being with others in ways in where we're really engaged together, really noticing each other, saves lives. Yesterday, your board gathered and did some really important work, but on Friday night, they had dinner together, and that was just as important, thanks to your president, Steve Hirsch. I hear a whole bunch of people had fun at the camp out and dinner last night, and that's one of the great gifts of community. Here you can meet someone who's older or younger than you, of another race or sexual orientation or gender orientation, who does something for a living that you can't even understand or comprehend, who has hobbies that fascinate you or stories you won't hear in any other place. I believe with all my heart that it is the relating that keeps us whole. Researchers have found that living in constant stress wears down our telomeres, the caps on our DNA, which protect our cells from illness and aging. And Andrew Zolli, that social entrepreneur, says, all civilizations face their fragilities. Many residents of the world's wealthiest nations, particularly those in the United States, have felt fortunate to live through a period of largely isolated from shocks and disruptions. This vacation from history enabled many to become, he said, accustomed to living at the efficient but fragile end of the robust yet fragile continuum. He goes on to say, in a world temporarily devoid of consequences, the slow erosion of the country's political, financial, socioeconomic, and ecological systems scarcely seem to matter. But now that a new, more volatile chapter has begun, those now compromised systems have flipped from being engines of resilience to sources of fragility. So playing and praying, creating and relating, those kinds of practices are essential to engage the totality of who we are. With every passing summer, we're given unwanted doses of things that make us sad and angry and frightened, so we have to cultivate those that bring us joy. You know, the God jar really doesn't have any special powers. And here we hold many ideas about what's holy and sacred. And many of us, though, don't believe in that kind of all-powerful deity that can sweep all the world's problems away. My friends, I do believe, though, that new possibilities exist, many that we don't even know that we haven't ever yet created. We don't believe here that they're going to happen because of some great outside cosmic force. Rebirth, resilience, and restoration will happen because we each continue with good spirits and willing energy to put in our little oar and keep rowing. If we do that, it might just be that our boat keeps moving along, it's lifted, the tides turn, and some good is created. By caring for ourselves and for one another, we create the conditions for more to thrive. 2 weeks from now, we will gather waters from our summer into our annual water ceremonies and our rituals where we gather together, our lives, our stories, our waters. Held on Labor Day weekend, it will signify the end of summer. For some of us, it will mean remembrances of places we have traveled, but for more of us each year, it just reminds us of what brings us joy. And here's the good news. You still have 2 weeks to journey towards water and have some joy there. 2 weeks, 2 weeks. So let's renew those cells or their end caps. Let's keep on making the deep asks. Let's paint and color outside the lines. Let's remember most of all that we need one another. Playing, praying, creating, relating. Let's do it. Let's build joy.